We're up to Yehoshua, perek Yudches, the 18th chapter, and now we're moving into a stage where it's what's called the remaining 7 tribes. What does that mean? We've already dealt with 3 tribes or 2.5 tribes on the east bank of the Jordan. We dealt with the 2 main tribes in Israel, which is Yehuda and Ephraim and Manasseh. So we have those tribes. That is a total. That now leaves us 7 tribes left that have not yet been addressed in the tribal allotment, and that's where it leaves us. What also happens today is we find the arrival and the setting up of the first capital of ancient Israel, and that's going to be our topic at the beginning today. And for those of you who have not visited it, it's really a really important part of our journey, a very important part of the story of Israel. So let's begin. So we start. The first part describes that it's important to read the first few psukim together because these really are crucial. Where it describes the beginning of the perek by Kol Adas Bnei Yisrael Shiloh. Every arrives in a place called Shiloh. Right? Shiloh is a very popular name of places. In fact, if you look in Shiloh, there's many Shilohs in America, right? And there was a battle of Shiloh in one of the American wars. Shiloh is a very, very popular name because it was in Israel, of course. Vayashkimu Sham Es Oil Moed, that place at the tent of meeting, that refers to what? That's the Mishkan. Asher Lo Yichalko, it says, the land was conquered in front of them. Vayvasru Bnei Yisrael Asher Lo Yichalko Es Nach Losam Shiva Shvatim. There were 7 remaining tribes. Vayomer Yehoshua El Bnei Yisrael Ad Ana Atem Misrapim Lavo Loreshes Aretz. Why are you lax in inheriting the rest of the land? Asher Nasan Hashem Lachem Elokei Avosechem. And he goes on and he says, I want you to send me representatives of the remaining tribes, 3 representatives of each tribe, and you are going to go out and you're going to survey. You're going to go to each of the remaining territories and you're going to divide it up, and then you're going to come back to me. We'll do a lottery and each of the remaining tribes will get the portion that remains of those tribes. And that's what happens is, in Pasuk Yud we start hearing Vayashlech lehem Yehoshua goral b'shiloi lifnei Hashem v'chalek sham Yehoshua es haaretz livnei Yisrael kamach al hakasam. He takes the surveys, he does a lottery, and then he redivides the remaining areas of Israel between these 7 tribes. We'll call this stage 2 of our lottery. The winner is Binyamin. So Binyamin is the next in line, and we hear about the land of Binyamin. If you follow all the actual descriptions there, you can sort of see the Gvul is the Fast Tzafona min Yardain. So it starts off by the Jordan River. V'Allah Gvul El Kesef Yericha mitzafon. It goes along the literally the shoulder of Jericho. V'Allah Bahar Yoman. It goes westwards up the mountains. V'Yatzosah Midbara Beis Aven. It goes up to Beis Aven, which is near Beit El. Right, so you can follow each of the borders of this land and see and trace the area of Benjamin, of Binyamin. And like it does with Yehuda, it tells us the major cities that are found in Binyamin, and those are found in Psukim Chav Aleph to Chav Ches. And we know the names of the cities. We hear them: Yericho, Beis Chagla, Emek Ketzitz, Beit Aravo, Utzmarayim, Beit El. Recently, actually, I just met with representatives of Har Chevron. Har Chevron is one of the 6 regional councils in Yehuda and Shomron. It's the southmost regional council, so it's in this area here. And they were described to me, actually, one of the ladies who was there was actually underlining all the cities today that are being used, which are cities from the times of the first temple. But they made an interesting point. They said that in Israel, legally speaking, you're not allowed to name a city or a village unless it's within a certain proximity of its ancient namesake, right? Which is, so like as an example, there's a city with the village called, they wanted to call it Devir, but it's actually not close enough to the ancient Devir, so they call it Devira, as an example, because so if you have a city which has a name to it, which you see in these psukim, you can be sure that somewhere very close to it is its archaeological dig, which is pretty amazing. So when you hear these names of these cities, we can actually see them, and you can go visit the modern day a reflection of this. Okay, so here we go. We have a lot of questions. This perek does not make sense on a number for a number of reasons. But before we even ask the questions, technical question: when did this occur? When did they arrive in Shiloh? At which point in time is this actually occurring? The Radak tells us something which makes it even more difficult to understand this chapter. And that is, the Radak tells us this was after 14 years. It was after 7 years of kivush, of conquest, and 7 years of chiluk, of distribution. That's when the Mishkan found its home in Shiloh. That's what the Radak tells us. It makes it difficult. Why is this difficult?
What did the 7 Shvatim do in the interim?
Right, I mean, like it sounds like they spent all 7 years just giving the property to 2 tribes, or really, I mean, it's really actually 4 tribes, really, right? So Reuven, Gad, Menashe, Ephraim, and Yehuda. So it's 5 of the 7 tribes have got their tribal allotments. So it took them 7 days.
The Goral itself, though, then didn't have all the names.
Right. Or there are 2 stages of Goral.
So long to
Precisely. It's difficult to understand. Like, what was happening? Why was there a 2-stage process? If you look at the actual psukim, the Radak is quoting Chazal. And the reason why Radak is quoting Chazal is because what he's saying is like this, is the Mishkan only settled after they were settled. That's what it sounds like. And in fact, the Chida points out this is what you could argue in one of 2 ways. You could either say it's a siman or a siba. It's a famous terminology. Siman is it's a sign. When do they bring the Ark of the Covenant to a resting place? After they've finished using it, meaning they've used it in battle. We see that they're going to use the Ark of the Covenant in battle. It goes forth into battle, at least one of them, because there may be 2 of them. Well, we'll get there, God willing, in Sefer Shmuel. But the Ark of the Covenant goes out to battle. If they're resting it, it's a sign that all the battles are done. Right? So that might be the one way of interpreting it. The Chida says it could be the other way around. Maybe when they brought the Ark to rest, then the land quietened down, meaning it being in a state of unease or movement is an indication that Israel itself is not in a good space right now. Okay, be it as it may, it goes one of those 2 ways. But if you read the actual psukim without Chazal, without the Radak, it could well be that this is within the process of the Yishuv Haaretz, right? Meaning, first stage was the 2 major tribes, the East Bank, of course, but the 2 major tribes, which is Yehuda and Ephraim, and then in this process they establish the Mishkan and they move onwards. It is helpful to realize that in which territory is the Mishkan? It's in Ephraim, which is in Shiloh, which is in Har Ephraim, which is helpful. So once they distribute the land to Ephraim, it makes sense. The next step is they put the Mishkan there, and then they continue the process of distribution. Right? So it may not be at the end of the 14 years, it might be somewhere in the 14 years if you read the psukim themselves. But be as it may, it's a stage in the distribution of the land of Israel. Which leads us now to the question, so why Shiloh? Like, why of all places Shiloh? Just by a quick show of hands, who's been to Shiloh? Okay, good. We have an educated audience. If you haven't, you've got to go to Shiloh. Okay, it really is a necessary part of your Israel experience. And Be'ezra Hashem, if you come on the tour, it will be. So Shiloh is the most amazing place. So you drive north of Jerusalem. It's essentially halfway between Jerusalem and Shechem, right? So it's on Derech Avot, which is the Route 60 is the biblical highway, right? So that's everybody who traveled north-south in those days. If you want to look at the video, the movie, the documentary that David Friedman put out, if you remember this, it's called Route 60, the Biblical Highway. It's fantastic. He goes from north to south, all the major cities in Israel on Route 60, right? So if you go, let's forget Nazareth for a second. That's not really our tradition. That's a later comer. But if you move all your way down, Shechem, Shiloh, Beis El, Kever Rachel, Yerushalayim, Hebron, Beersheba, it's all a north-south axis, right? And that's all the Route 60, which goes down the center of the country. And so Shiloh is just off Route 60, it's just off Derech Avot, as you are moving upwards north towards Shechem. It's just off the highway to the right. And now there's a settlement called Shiloh today. There's a beautiful yeshuv there, and there's an incredible archaeological dig, which leads us to the question is, why do they choose Shiloh out of all the places? How do they know this was the holy place out of all the places in Israel? There's a number of conjectures which are made. So Tamar Weissman has a beautiful book called Tribal Lands, and she writes about it's really about this era. It's excellent. She does a fantastic job, and she points out that if you look at the ruins of Shiloh, which you can see, it's amazing because there's multiple layers, right, of ruins, of course, right? Because you can go see the Makom, which is the Muslim place that they put on top of the place of 2 churches, because that's how Islam works. They build on top of other civilizations. But then there's a Byzantine church, but that's already just a mere 1800 years old. So that's the newcomers. But then you can find the Israelite settlements, and you can go back to the Canaanite settlements. There was settlement built on top of settlement. what is fascinating is you can go back to the old Canaanite walls, which means that this city of Shiloh clearly was a Canaanite settlement in the late Bronze Age, which is when we're talking, and it was there before the Israelites were there. But it was interesting in that it was an extremely well fortified city. So the walls of the Canaanites were over 5 feet thick. Those were very serious walls. You can actually see them. You can go see the edges of the Canaanite walls, the ramparts. And those walls, they showed no sign of conquest and no sign of destruction around the time of the Israelites entering, which would indicate, and by the way, in all of Sefer Yehoshua, we don't hear a battle of Shiloh. We don't hear a battle for Shiloh, which means to say is that it probably wasn't a battle, it was probably abandoned, right? The refugees, right? They settled in Gaza, right? But the truth is that we don't have a battle, which indicates that it was probably abandoned, whether it was through the war campaign or just randomly they happened to resettle elsewhere. So it happened to be a perfect location, a well fortified location for the Israelites. We see in the design of the actual buildings, the 4-roomed houses, which were Israelite. That's the sort of template of the Israelite houses in those days. So they built within the city, and this is where they happened to place the Mishkan as well. It's in the heartland, in the center of Israel. Because if you think about it, there's Shiloh, and if you think about Israel north to south, it's pretty much dead center. So you're going to make a place of pilgrimage. It's also going to be a place which you can approach from all angles as well. And it's for these, among other reasons, it was chosen. It happens to be, just interestingly enough, if you go into the excavations, one of the interesting facets about Shiloh, which is just fascinating, is it has what's called acoustic perfection. What does that mean? Is that there's certain areas which are excellent for sound, right? Excellent for sound, and that's really important in the days before AV, right? So imagine you were to have a large gathering of people, and you wanted there to be a speech. You wanted to be so everybody has to hear everything. Just outside Shiloh, in the surrounding area of Shiloh, it has acoustic perfection, greater sound carrying than in a concert hall. Is that interesting? Wow. Right, which is very helpful. So you could have thousands, tens of thousands of people gathering there for pilgrimage and being able to hear large gathered speeches, which would be in this area as well. Just fascinating, like attributes and facets of it. Where the Mishkan actually settled is a matter of debate. There are 3 opinions as to where it is. The general consensus today is that it was in an area which is just outside, just north of what's called Tel Shiloh, which is the ancient Shiloh area, and you can go visit there. And it's a large flat area which has the exact dimensions of the Mishkan, which is 50 by 100 amos, 50 cubits by 100 cubits. It's a large flat area. In their excavations in that area, they've found holes in the rock for large beams, like for the establishment of a large structure, which date exactly back to this time. So that's the general consensus today, although the excavation continues because it goes so fast. When I recently visited Ir David, I was asking them about a particular archaeological question I had, and they said, "Oh, that's outdated research." They said, "Here, if you have information which is more than 2 years old, you're already too late. It's going so fast what they're discovering. So by the time you go and then you go again, they've found new things, and so their theories have changed as well. So Be'ezra Hashem, but it's just amazing. So this is where the Mishkan is, and you can explore it. It's a large archaeological park because the new Shiloh, what we have today, is built on the top of the hill. Actually, Tel Shiloh is built actually a little bit lower down, and there's a reason for that. And we'll get to that in a second, why it was built a little lower down than the mountaintop, which is usually more protected. But be it as it may, what did the Mishkan look like? And this is the greatest fallacy, and this is why we've got to learn Navi, why we have to learn Nach, and not just Chumash, because most people have no idea what the Mishkan looked like. There's a contradiction in terms. The Gemara in Zalchim tells us that one describes the Mishkan as a bias, as a house. That one describes it as an oil, which is a tent. A tent and a house are different things. They're built differently. The Gemara resolves that by saying that, in fact, it was stone at the bottom and curtains at the top. Stone at the bottom, curtains at the top. That means that something changed. In the desert, the walls of the Mishkan were made of wooden beams. Those are called krashim. Why did it need to be made of wooden beams? Because they had 42 stops along their journey. That's what's called, that's Parshas Masei. These are the journeys. They had 42 stops. You can't take a permanent structure. So the structure was a movable structure. It was a tent which moved. They placed the krushim, the beams, on wagons, and they moved to the next place, set up, they had sockets, large metal sockets, which held the beams in place. There were center poles which held it in on 5 levels. It was a whole thing. And then there was tent coverings. But when they got to Shiloh, they weren't moving, right? So if they weren't moving, therefore the Mishkan looked completely different. In fact, how long was the Mishkan in Shiloh for? The Radak tells us 369 years. That should be a shock to most people, because the base of Mikdash was only in Jerusalem for over 400 years, which means that if you were to divide up the first Commonwealth of Israel in the land of Israel, almost half of it is the Mishkan in Shiloh. That's pretty remarkable, right? That's pretty remarkable. We don't ever think of that because we think Sefer Shoftim is a short book. It may be a short book, but it's a long time. Okay? And so Yehoshua and Shoftim take up almost 400 years, and then the Sefer Shmuel Aleph, Shmuel Beis, Melachim Aleph, Melachim Beis take up the next 400 years of the 800 years sojourn in the land of Israel. That's pretty amazing. Okay, so so we should appreciate that we're talking about a significant spiritual center of the nation of Israel. Let's look different. Just take a look at the picture, by the way. Just put it in. This is from the Temple Institute on top of page 5. That is a depiction of what the Mishkan and Shiloh may have looked like. You notice that it is a building made of stone, but they still have the covering is the covering of the yerios, of the curtains at the top. Contrast that to the picture below it, which is a rendition of what the Mishkan would look like in the desert. We usually associate Mishkan with the bottom picture, which is the tabernacle, the moving tent. But actually, the picture is more likely to be, because remember, the moving tent was only for 40 years, right? Less than 40 years. The full building was for 400 years. So the more accurate picture in our memory should be the top picture, because that's what it looked like as well. And one second, and then okay, so that's what we have over here. So we have this very significant period of time. Now, what changes did it bring about in Jewish life? So most people are also not aware of this. It's just important that this is a watershed moment in Jewish history. You see, how could you sacrifice to God? So in the old days, there was different ways of sacrificing and coming close to God, and one of them is the Mishnah in Zachim tells us in source 8. Ad Shiloh Kama Mishkan. There's 6 stages in Jewish history before the Mishkan was established. So before the desert experience, how would you serve God? Your backyard. You'd put up an altar. Who would be the priest? The firstborn was sort of had a sort of some sort of priestly responsibility, and that's how people would serve God. Misha Hukam Mishkan, when the Mishkan was established in the times of the desert, Me'es Rabamos, you could not bring a sacrifice in your own backyard. Va'avoda b'kohanim, the priesthood shifted to actual priests, the tribe of Levi. The Holy of Holies meats would only sacrifice in the Mishkan, and the meats which, like let's say a shlomim, could be eaten in all of the entire encampment of Israel. That was the second stage. Stage number 3. Bola Gilgal, they came to Gilgal. Where is Gilgal? Folks, we should remember this. This is just north of Jericho. That was where they put their encampment for 14 years, according to Chazal, that they waited there while conquering the land. So while they were doing this, the Mishkan resided as a temporary structure in Gilgal, and Hutra Bamos, then people were allowed to have Bamos. Why? Because they weren't settled. There was no, they just coming back to Gilgal while they're in the middle of a war campaign. Not so simple. The holy meats had to be sacrificed in the Mishkan, but the second degree holy, the Kochim Kalim, could be eaten wherever they were, right? Because of the flexibility of the time. Finally, the Mishnah says, Bo Shiloh, when they came to Shiloh, that's our perek. When they arrived in Shiloh, so they moved from Gilgal, which was a war encampment for 14 years, and they came to Shiloh, which was now its first spiritual capital. Then what happens is Nes Rabamos, V'lo Sham Tikra. That's the description that we just looked at. So they had the stone structure covered by curtains. They had to bring the korbanos there. This was its resting place, which is based on the pasuk. The Holy of Holies meat would be eaten inside the climb, which means the curtains, or that's the perimeter of the Mishkan. What's called haro'eh? Within eyesight. This is also another reason why we know that Shiloh is Shiloh, not just because the Arab name is as such, but if you go to every adjoining mountaintop within eyesight of Shiloh, which is lower than all the other mountaintops, which means it can be seen at the perimeter of all other mountaintops, you will find broken pottery and animal bones, which makes a lot of sense because when pottery was used as a plate for kodesh kalim, you can't clean pottery, you can't burn it out, right? So what they would do is they would break the containers of their food as they passed the area called Kol Haro, which was eyesight of Shiloh. So every mountaintop on all directions and every perimeter has broken pottery at this particular place because that was where they reached the perimeter. So it matches exactly, the archaeology matches exactly what the Mishnah says over here. It's just phenomenal. And then finally, Baal and Novi Givon. They came to this. The next stage was the fifth stage. They came to Novi and Givon. Why did it go to Novi and Givon, which by the way are both in the tribe of Binyamin? Because the Mishkan was destroyed. We'll get that at the beginning of Sefer Shmuel. And the Novi and Givon were temporary structures. The Mishkan never really had a permanent structure in this interleading stage. And finally, then there was Baal Yerushalayim. Then it came to Jerusalem. And Jerusalem, then that was called Nachala, its inheritance. Then at that point in time, Bamos were never allowed afterwards. That became its permanent establishment. There were 6 stages. To understand, this was actually a change in Jewish ritual life, right? As opposed to being able to sacrifice a korban and then take it with you in your bag and eat it on the battlefield, now you had to go to Shiloh and eat it within the perimeter, a flexible perimeter, albeit, but it was a perimeter that you had to actually be able to eat your meat. So this is actually a significant change in the way that the nation of Israel was now, their spiritual center was going to work, how their pilgrimages would work as well. So now, let's move, yes. Oh, okay, so let's move into just a few details. Yehoshua is getting upset with people, right? He's saying to them, why are you wasting your time? Go and conquer the land. Well, like, really, what happened? Were they not, it sounded like they were conquering land. They're like, what was going on? The Babylon explains, you know why? It says the people were lax in doing the division of their lands. They weren't interested in doing chiluk haaretz. I would have thought that, everybody would want to let me get my property. It's the gold rush. Let's everybody, I want to get as much territory as possible. Real estate, this is when it's cheap. Let's get into the market now. That's not what they were doing. Why, says Abarbanel? Because they've appreciated the federal government to do the conquests. Meaning like this. Remember, what happened was Yehoshua did the first stage, which was the general conquest. But now there's going to be individual conquests in each individual territory, in each individual state or tribal territory. Which means that each shevet is going to have its own army, and is going to have its own police force, and is going to have to do its work. And they were hesitant about this. They preferred having the federal government doing the work rather than the state governments doing this, which is why they kind of were waiting. The longer they waited it out before getting their allotment, the more the federal government would have, so to speak, cleaned the floor for them, that when they arrived at their territorial allotment, they would have it'll be a little easier job. Yehoshua says, sorry folks, it's your job, you've got to do your job. And so we're going to do the lottery whether you like it or not for your territory. And now that means to say, with that comes the responsibilities of setting up municipalities, setting up police forces, taking care of the neighbors who didn't leave and were supposed to leave, all the things that you are resisting. It's time to grow up now. Now you can't rely on the whole nation. You're going to have to rely on your localized governments. Okay, so that was one of the resistances. We all fall into that category. We prefer the larger institutions to do the work that we need to do individually, but that's the way it is, right? So Yehoshua is saying it's time to grow up, it's time to go out, establish your government, establish your place, take the responsibility of whatever falls in your corner. That's how the way Abarbanel understands it as well. Which leads us to the question then is, so why did Yehuda and Ephraim and Manasseh get their portions? Meaning they didn't seem to have a problem. They took the major areas, right? So what happened to them? They seem to be all right with all of this. Possible answers could be, let's think about this, is it could be, as the Malbim says, is they are going to be the progeny. Their progeny is going to be the kings of Israel, right? And we're going to have the Davidic line. We're going to have the line of Shaul, which is going to be in this area over here. The larger areas of Israel are going to be governed by these two states, right? These two children, and so they got first. It could be, though, on a more practical level, is maybe, as the Abarbanel points out, is they just did their job. Meaning, Yehoshua said, okay, we're going to divide the land. And guess who stepped forward? The the two tribes of Yehuda and Ephraim and Manasseh, and they stepped forward, so they conquered their land. They didn't need reminding. It was the rest of the tribes, Yisachar, Zvulun, Dan, Naphtali. They weren't so alacritous in this whole business. They actually preferred the arrangement right now, so they waited. But that, which is why they didn't need to get prodded as well. So why did Binyamin get chosen next? And the answer is because that's what Yehoshua's hand touched when he pulled out the lottery ticket. But why was it that God arranged that Binyamin should be on that lottery ticket? So why did he get first? Because he's this sort of in-between territory over here. So there's a book called The Early Prophets by Dr. Everett Fox. And he writes, his argument is that the text starts with Benjamin, which is in, this is source 12, he says, seemingly as a logical next step in the march from south to north. Right? So, meaning in the progression, most of the other tribes are going to be in this area, in this large U in the north. But Binyamin over here needs to be accounted for. He says, but more likely based on the traditional familial order with Yaakov's main wives' sons first, and then those of their maidservants. So Yehuda, of course, is the king. But then Ephraim, Manasseh, and Binyamin are all the children of Rachel, and so there's a certain preferential treatment in that as well. So it could be because of that hierarchy, be it as it may. Okay, hard to know because Reuven, Shimon, they're not chopped liver either, but nonetheless, at least the children of Rachel seems to be getting as well. There is more to it, and Binyamin does have a few unique facets in his portion which are not to be overlooked, and that is a few details. One is the word that it uses to describe his boundaries. Is it doesn't say, usually it describes v'yorad hagvul, the boundary descends. That's the way that the verb used to describe bounding. But in Binyamin it uses a unique word. It says v'arlah hagvul, the boundary ascends. Now, whether it descends or ascends, meaning like whichever way you're tilting the pen when you're drawing your boundary, it's still a boundary. So the verb is immaterial as to what really actually happened, right? I hope we're on the same page. Like, it doesn't make a difference how you draw the boundary. The boundary is the boundary, right? But the reason why it is significant, the Gemara says, why don't you use the word Allah, the boundary ascends, is because in his territory is going to be the Beis HaMikdash, which means that we know that Binyamin actually accounts for most of Jerusalem, actually, the northern parts of Jerusalem, which is going to be where the Beis HaMikdash is in the territory of Binyamin. And he doesn't know this yet, and isn't yet, but at least Mount Moriah is in, Hara Moriah is in the territory of Binyamin. So maybe his getting first is because of what he is going to contain in his territory as well. In fact, in the bracha that Moshe Rabbeinu gives to the tribe of Binyamin, he describes, and this we know because of Simchas Torah Leining, LeBinyamin Amar Yedid Hashem Mishkan Levetach Alav. The dear one to God, Hashem will dwell securely upon him. That's referring to the Beis HaMikdash. Chofeif Alav Kol Hayom. The Shechina, the divine presence, will be hovering over him all day. Bein Keseifav Shachen, between his shoulders he will dwell. This is a clearly reference to the Beis HaMikdash. What does it mean, Bein Keseifav? So technically speaking, it means that Hara Moriah is not the highest part, it's the second highest part in Binyamin. It's sort of between the shoulders. It's one step down, which is sort of a cleft between the hills, which is where the Beis HaMikdash will metaphorically live. But the Ibn Ezra says Bein Keseifav also means between the territories, which I think is also, if you see the map, is very helpful to realize, is it's really in between all the territories. It's between Yehuda and Ephraim, between Yehuda and Manasseh. It's the center of Israel. It's Bein Keseifav. And now go back and think about the beginning of Parshas Vayigash. What happens? We have Yehuda approaching Yosef, and what is the discussion about? Binyamin. Right? So if you think about it, Binyamin is in between Yehuda and Yosef. Right? That's essentially the in terms of individual characters on the floor here, you have Yehuda pleading for Binyamin to Yosef, and actually territorially here is Yehuda with Binyamin in between him and Ephraim and Manasseh, which is Yosef. Right? So meaning it's almost as if geographically Parshas Vayigash is played out in the territorial distributions, and that perhaps could be part of Bein Keseifav, Shachay, between the shoulders. Between the large players of Israel dwells a small pivotal part. And we're going to see that this is a very pivotal nation because there's going to be a civil war which almost completely wipes out Benjamin. As we get to the end of Sefer Shoftim, where there's going to the first civil war in Israel is going to be surrounding Binyamin. And so it's going to be here's a very serious hinge between north and south later on as well. So here's an important territory which will have consequences. If you go to Israel and you go to north of Jerusalem, you just drive north of Jerusalem, one of the greatest nachas I get is just when you see the road signs. It's called today the municipality of Binyamin, right? Just north of Jerusalem. And you'll see on the road, take a look on the page 7 at the bottom left there, these signs. Binyamin, and it's Binyamin Za'ev Yitraf. Right? Where does that come from? That's the bracha of Yaakov into Binyamin, which is why the symbol of the wolf, right? He was likened to a wolf. Whenever you see the stained glass windows in shuls, Benjamin is always a wolf because of Binyamin Za'ev Yitraf. And so the symbol of the regional council of Binyamin is the wolf, right? Which is, it just gives me so much nachas. You're going through past Psagot winery, and there it is the local municipality of Binyamin. It all comes back to this perek, right? Meaning we know where it is. In fact, I included a map. That's the local council of the municipality. There's 6 municipalities in all Yehuda and Shomron, the heartland of Israel. Just north of Jerusalem is the council of Binyamin, and you'll see this, the entrance of every yeshuv will be the same sign, the sign of the wolf, because it goes back to our chapter. It's all comes back to the history. So next time if you're going to Adam, if you go to Beit El, if you go to any of the areas over here, this is all in Moetzet Ezorit Matei Binyamin, which is the Benjamin local council. This is where the large shopping center is, right? If you're going to just past Psagot winery there, right? There's a large shopping center. That was actually where Ari Fuld was murdered, if you remember, was just over there. And I mean, this is all right there in this area. So many yeshuvim which are there. Ramallah, Beit El, everything which is in this area is the Moetzet Binyamin.
It's a cute medrash briefly. Take Sefer Shochen. When the goblet was found in Binyamin's sack, the brothers beat him on his shoulders.
Interesting.
He said, "You're a ganav just like your mother's a ganav. She stole the trofim, you stole his gavia." And Binyamin was quiet, and because of that, he earned the Kodesh.
Amazing that his shoulders are carried. Beautiful,
he took
beautiful.
Shoulders, so to speak.
Just beautiful, and that carries on. Now, here I'm going to leave everybody with one just curious thing here, and you see it happening in our perek twice, and that is, does Binyamin know why he got the lottery first? I would argue no. He has no idea. Meaning we, with historical gratuity, right, have the ability to say, the Beis Hamikdash, being Sefer Shachain, and the whole thing. He has no idea. And by the way, for the first 400 years, he's not going to see that at all. Like, there's no sign of that. Nobody is making pilgrimage to Binyamin. They're going through Binyamin to Har Ephraim, right? So if you ask Binyamin at this point in time, no idea. And I'll go further, because it happens earlier, is if you were to ask Ephraim, right, do you know that you're going to contain the first religious epicenter of Israel, which is going to be the pilgrimage site of Shiloh? Ephraim would say, no idea. It only happened in Yehoshua perek Yud, right? I had no idea about this. Which leads us to a curious thing, because when you go back to the Torah and Sefer Devarim, and the Torah tells us, when you bring sacrifices, you need to bring it in a special place. Right, it's called the Shichnoi Sidrushu Vasa Shama. That's how the pasuk is described. The Shichnoi, where Hashem will bring His Shechina, His residence. Right, Shichnoi Tidrushu, you'll seek it out, Uvasa Shama, and you'll go there. But the Torah does not spell out Shiloh, Nov, Givon, and finally Yerushalayim. It doesn't tell us those locations, which means the people a priori had no idea until they were actually there. Which leads us to a question is, couldn't the Torah be a little more explicit? It would make it so much easier. Let the Torah just say, by the way, where this place is, it's going to be a few years over here, then it's going to go over there, right? So, and then we'd actually know what we're dealing with. It would make the whole world a lot simpler. And the answer is actually no. It would make the world a lot more complicated. And the Rambam actually in Moreh Nevuchim goes on to describe this. The Rambam goes on in source 17, in the Moreh, in the Guide to the Perplexed, and in the third section, he makes the following observation. I think this is a profound insight into what's going on right now in our chapter especially. He says, V'ein sofek etzli. He says, I have no doubts. Gam kein she'hamokom asher yichto Avraham b'nevuah hayu yadua etzel Moshe Rabbeinu ve'etzel Rabbim. I think Moses knew where Avraham Avinu made the sacrifice of Yitzchak, or almost there did, right? He knew where Har Moriah was. He says, She'Avram tziva osam sheyeh beis avodah. We know that Avraham Avinu said that this should be a place of service of God. We know the Targum describes, the Psukim say, that Avraham Avinu prayed and served. Palach is to serve in that place. V'amar kodem Hashem Yahachon Yohon Palchin Daraya. And Avraham Avinu said, in the future, generations to serve you. So they knew there was something special about Har HaMoriah. V'asher lo yispare b'Torah v'lo nizkar b'frat. And the Torah never goes on to tell us that therefore they should establish the Beis HaMikdash there. Aval remez elo v'amar el makom asher yuchar Hashem. It hinted to it. Yesh bo etzli shalosh chochmos. Says the Rambam, I think there are 3 reasons why the Torah did not explicitly tell them to go in and to before they went in that this is the place, that Shiloh is going to be special and that Yerushalayim is going to be special. 3 reasons, and they are so incandescently true today. Reason number 1, he says, "Ha'achas mehen shelo yachziku boi ha'umus v'yilachamu alav milchama chazaka kashedu sejeh makam min ha'aretz hu tachlis ha'torah." If the nations of the world were to hear, remember, everybody wants to hear what the Jews have to say. Like, we don't want them to, but they want to, right? So everything we do, right, we breathe in through our left nostril, and it's like international news, right? We lift a brick to make a house. Like, a Jew, you can buy a piece of land in anywhere in the world, but if a Jew buys a land in ancient Israel, then the whole world, all the NGOs, there's a satellite watching Yehuda and Shomron with an NGO financed from Europe to say this is a international crime, right? If you host a Nefesh B'Nefesh, conference in Manhattan, it's an international law breaking, right? It's ridiculous, right? So he says, imagine that they were to know that Jerusalem or Shiloh would be our center before we got there. What would they do? They would set up their entire army around it, right? Think about Jerusalem today. They wanted to put in security cameras on Har HaBayis. Security cameras on Har HaBayis. Like at the Mecca, you don't think they have metal detectors and security? Of course they do. But on Har HaBayis, that was changing the status quo. There were riots. There were people being stabbed in Jerusalem a few years ago. Remember this? Right? Just because they wanted to put cameras. I mean, like it became the greatest international hoo-ha was because of cameras on Har HaBayis. What we do in our holy sites is of great interest to all other copycat religions, right? So if they'd known beforehand that this was a holy site, they would never have allowed us to fight and take it. So when was it discovered? After we conquered it, right? The next reason, he says, is there's possibly another angle that the non-Jews would have taken. He says, "Shelo yafsidu misha hayah b'yadam ata." The nations, they knew it was holy to us. Maybe they wouldn't defend it. Maybe they'd just destroy it. Think Tomb of Yosef, right? Think about that you go to the Jewish quarter in the old city, and next to the Churva Shul is a minaret, right? And it's like there's no Muslims who are using that minaret. Like, just take it down. No, but we're Jews. We don't destroy the holy sites of other religions that came thousands of years after us, right? We live and let live, right? That's not the way they operate. The Churva has been destroyed twice by Muslims, right? Right? And that's not even the ancient shul. The tomb of Yosef, the holy Yosef, is desecrated, every so often. And for a Jew to even go pray in their holy site, it's under threat of death. It's right when our holy shrines are destroyed and by other religions. So we're going to wait on the outside until we get into the inside, and then Hashem's going to say, this is where your holy sites are. And thirdly, and the Rambam says the most consequential, because you think that the previous 2 were bad, the third one's worse. And that is not because of the non-Jews. And he says the following, it's the strongest reason. Just imagine, you said, okay folks, Jerusalem, Shiloh, right? It would be the gold rush of the century, right? Everybody running to Shiloh to stake their claim. It's like if you want to be an investor and you want to know that your property is going to go up, make a development to put an Orthodox synagogue in the middle, right? It's like every house, you can measure the price based on proximity to the synagogue, right? Because that's the way people have to walk. It's a given, right? You get the right shul, the right crowd. Just think about, go down to Florida and think about proximity to shuls, right? In developments, just the way it works. Now say, okay, folks, we're gonna like lift cut the ribbon. Everybody's gonna run in, and everybody's gonna go in and just kill each other to get to Shiloh. Why? Because that's where the Mishkan's gonna be. So God says, no. You're gonna go in. You're gonna conquer. You're gonna divide. You're gonna do a lottery. After it's in your territory, which is our perek, meaning after you conquered Ephraim, then Hashem says, by the way, there is Shiloh, right? That's the place that'll be the necessary place to establish, which is why Shiloh is only established after Ephraim is distributed. which makes so much sense historically. We always think from a post-facto perspective, but you have to think about it a priori as they're developing, as they're seeing it. It therefore makes so much more sense right now, which is why our thin slice of history right now, they know about Shiloh, but they have no idea that Binyamin is next, although it happened to be that he got picked next, but they have no idea about that. Later on, they'll realize, oh, that's going to be the next stop for the base of the Mikdash. But in their progression right now, it's still part of the story. So folks, we're going to stop here. We'll deal with the next 6 tribes, God willing, next week. Thank you so much for coming.